the $15 billion digital weapon that almost destroyed the world's richest company. Imagine waking up to find that 30,000 computers in your company have been completely erased. Not hacked, not stolen from. Erased. Every file, every document, every piece of data, replaced with a single haunting image, a burning American flag. This isn't a movie plot. This happened to the world's most valuable company, and the weapon used was so devastating that cybersecurity experts still call it one of the most destructive cyber attacks in history. This is the story of Shamoon, the digital weapon that brought Saudi Aramco to its knees. August 15, 2012, 10:08 a.m. local time. Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. It's a Wednesday morning at Saudi Aramco headquarters, the nerve center of the company that produces 1 out of every 8 barrels of oil on planet Earth. Employees are settling into their workstations, sipping Arabic coffee, and checking emails. The air conditioning hums against the desert heat outside. Everything seems normal. Then, without warning, computer screens start flickering across the entire complex. One by one, like dominoes falling in slow motion, workstations begin displaying an image that will haunt the company for years: a burning American flag. And beneath it, a simple, chilling message. Within minutes, 30,000 computers, nearly 75% of Saudi Aramco's entire PC infrastructure, are completely destroyed. Not frozen, not infected, destroyed. The hard drives are being systematically wiped clean, overwritten with meaningless data, rendered permanently unusable. The world's richest company is about to learn what true digital warfare looks like. Before we dive into the attack itself, you need to understand who Saudi Aramco is, because this isn't just any company. This is the crown jewel of Saudi Arabia, a corporation so massive, so valuable, that when it went public in 2019, it became the most valuable company on Earth, worth over $2 trillion. That's more than Apple, Google, and Microsoft combined at the time. Saudi Aramco doesn't just drill for oil. It is oil. The company controls approximately 260 billion barrels of proven oil reserves. That's about 15% of all the world's known petroleum. Every single day, Aramco produces roughly 10 million barrels of crude oil. To put that in perspective, that's enough to fill 630,000 cars with gasoline. Every single day, the company employs over 70,000 people. It operates the world's largest oil processing facility. Its revenue in some years exceeds the GDP of entire nations. When Saudi Aramco sneezes, global oil prices catch a cold. And in August 2012, someone decided to try to kill it. Now, here's where this story gets really interesting, and why you need to stick around until the end, because the Shamoon attack wasn't just about destroying computers. It was a message, a demonstration of power, and the identity of who was really behind it involves international espionage, geopolitical revenge, and a level of sophistication that made even the NSA take notice. So who attacked Saudi Aramco? How did they do it? And most importantly, why couldn't one of the world's most powerful companies stop them? Stay with me, because what you're about to learn will change how you think about cybersecurity forever. Let's rewind to the weeks before the attack. July 2012. Saudi Aramco's IT security team is, by most measures, competent. They have firewalls, antivirus software, intrusion detection systems. They've invested millions in cybersecurity infrastructure. After all, when you're literally the most valuable energy company on the planet, you're a target. Everyone knows this. But here's what they don't know. They're already compromised. Somewhere in Saudi Aramco's sprawling digital infrastructure, malware is sleeping, waiting. It's been there for weeks, possibly months, quietly establishing backdoors, mapping the network, and identifying critical systems. It's learning the architecture of the company's digital nervous system like a burglar studying the layout of a mansion before the heist. This malware isn't like typical viruses. It's not trying to steal credit card numbers or ransom files. It has one purpose and one purpose only: maximum destruction. The attackers have studied Saudi Aramco's network topology. They know which servers control what. They've identified the company's crown jewels, the systems that run oil production, refining operations, and pipeline management. But interestingly, they're not targeting those. Not directly, anyway. They're targeting something else: the company's ability to function as a modern business. They're going after the computers that employees use to communicate, to process transactions, to coordinate the massive logistical operation that keeps oil flowing from the Saudi desert to gas stations around the world. Think about it. You can have all the oil wells in the world, but if you can't coordinate shipments, process orders, manage inventory, or communicate with partners, you're paralyzed. You're a trillion-dollar company that's been suddenly transported back to the 1970s, operating with pen and paper. That's the nightmare scenario the attackers are engineering. And Saudi Aramco has no idea it's coming. August 15th, 2012, 11:08 a.m. local time. The malware wakes up. Later analysis would reveal that the attack was triggered remotely, possibly from a command and control server located thousands of miles away. Someone, somewhere, sent the digital equivalent of a go signal. And Shamoon, the name that would later be given to this devastating malware, began executing its mission. Here's how it worked, and trust me, this is where the technical brilliance becomes terrifying. Shamoon didn't just delete files. Deletion is reversible. You can recover deleted data with the right tools. No, Shamoon was designed to overwrite data. It would take files on a computer's hard drive and replace them, sector by sector, with junk data. Imagine taking a book and, instead of just erasing the words, going through and writing random letters over every single page. That book is now unreadable, irretrievable, gone forever. But Shamoon took it a step further. Before overwriting files, it would copy images from the infected computer to a specific folder. Then it would use one of those images, corrupted and partially overwritten, as the final payload. In most cases, this was an image of a burning American flag. The symbolism was clear. This wasn't just a cyber attack. This was a statement. And Shamoon was fast, devastatingly fast. The malware would first spread itself throughout the network, leveraging legitimate administrative credentials that the attackers had likely harvested during their reconnaissance phase. It would jump from computer to computer, establishing itself in as many machines as possible. Then, like synchronized swimmers, all the infected machines would begin the wiping process simultaneously. IT administrators at Aramco watched in horror as their network status boards lit up like a Christmas tree. Red alerts everywhere. Thousands of machines are going offline. The help desk was flooded with panicked calls from employees whose computers had suddenly died. My screen just went black. Everything's gone. There's a burning flag on my monitor. Within minutes, it became clear this wasn't a localized problem. This was happening across the entire company. Duron headquarters, refineries, administrative offices, even computers in remote facilities were being hit. Saudi Aramco was under siege, and the enemy was already inside the walls. Picture this. You're the chief information officer of the world's most valuable company. You just watched 30,000 computers effectively turn into expensive paperweights in less than an hour. Your employees are in chaos. Operations that depend on digital coordination are grinding to a halt. And you have absolutely no idea how to stop it because the attack is already done. This is where the story gets both fascinating and terrifying. The IT team at Saudi Aramco immediately disconnected the company's network from the internet. They shut down email servers. They started isolating systems, trying to contain what was, at that point, an unknown pathogen tearing through their digital infrastructure. But here's the problem. Shamoon had already accomplished its primary mission. The wiping was complete. 30,000 hard drives were now useless bricks. The question wasn't how to stop the attack. It was over. The question was, how do you rebuild an entire company's computer infrastructure from scratch? Saudi Aramco made a decision that would ripple through the global technology supply chain. They would replace every destroyed computer, all 30,000 of them. Think about what this means for a moment. 30,000 computers, with monitors, keyboards, mice, hard drives. The company sent out emergency purchase orders to technology suppliers around the world. Dell, HP, Lenovo, every major computer manufacturer suddenly got massive orders from Saudi Arabia. In fact, the demand was so unprecedented that it actually caused a temporary shortage in the global hard drive market. Prices for certain hard drive models spiked. Delivery times extended. Other companies trying to buy computer equipment found themselves in back orders because Saudi Aramco had essentially bought up a significant chunk of the world's available inventory. The financial cost? Estimates vary, but most cybersecurity experts put the damage somewhere between $5 billion and $15 billion when you factor in the hardware replacement, the recovery efforts, the lost productivity, and the operational disruption. $15 billion. To put that in perspective, that's more than the GDP of Iceland. That's the cost of 5 international space stations. That's enough money to pay the entire annual salary of every teacher in Florida for a single cyber attack. But here's where the story takes another dark turn. Replacing the hardware was only the beginning of Saudi Aramco's nightmare. The company had to operate in what can only be described as disaster mode for weeks. Employees resorted to using typewriters. Yes, actual typewriters, to process critical documents. Fax machines, which had been gathering dust in storage rooms, were suddenly worth their weight in gold. Paper forms that hadn't been used in a decade were hastily photocopied and distributed. Imagine being a 21st century energy giant, coordinating the production and distribution of 10 million barrels of oil per day, using technology from the 1980s. It was chaos. Beautiful, organized chaos, but chaos nonetheless. And throughout all of this, one question burned in everyone's mind. Who did this? Within hours of the attack, Saudi Aramco reached out to the best cybersecurity experts money could buy. They brought in teams from the NSA, the FBI, private cybersecurity firms like Mandiant and Symantec. This wasn't just a corporate crisis anymore. This was a matter of national security for Saudi Arabia and, by extension, global energy security. The malware samples were dissected line by line. Researchers worked around the clock, reverse engineering the code, looking for clues about its origin. And what they found was both impressive and terrifying. Shamoon was sophisticated. Not a nation-state sophisticated in the traditional sense. It didn't have the elegant complexity of Stuxnet, the cyber weapon that the US and Israel had used to sabotage Iran's nuclear program a few years earlier. But Shamoon had something else: ruthless efficiency. The malware was composed of several components. A dropper that installed the main payload. A wiper module that did the actual data destruction. A spreader that propagated the malware across the network. And a reporter module that sent information back to the command and control server. But here's what made Shamoon particularly nasty. It used a legitimate driver from a company called Raw Disk to gain low-level access to hard drives, bypassing security controls. It's like a thief using a real police badge to get past security. The systems couldn't tell the difference between legitimate operations and malicious ones. The malware also had a curious feature. It was compiled and set to activate on very specific dates. The August 15th attack was precisely timed. This suggested planning, coordination, and intent. This wasn't some random hacker group causing chaos for fun. This was targeted, deliberate, political. Then came the first major clue. A group calling itself the Cutting Sword of Justice claimed responsibility for the attack. In a public statement posted online, the group said they had targeted Saudi Aramco because of the company's crimes and atrocities in Saudi Arabia and around the world. They specifically mentioned the company's alleged role in suppressing dissent and supporting the Saudi government's policies. The statement was inflammatory, politically charged, and seemingly designed to paint the attack as the work of hacktivist groups, digital vigilantes seeking justice against a perceived oppressor. But cybersecurity researchers weren't buying it. The sophistication of Shamoon, the resources required to conduct reconnaissance and maintain persistence in Aramco's network, the timing of the attack, all of it pointed to something bigger than a hacktivist group. This had the hallmarks of a state-sponsored operation. But which state? Suspicion immediately fell on Iran. And to understand why, we need to talk about geopolitics, oil, and revenge. August 2012 was a tense time in the Middle East. Actually, let me rephrase that. August 2012 was an especially tense time in the Middle East, which is saying something. Iran was under crushing international sanctions because of its nuclear program. The United States and European Union had imposed the most severe economic restrictions in modern history. Iran's oil exports, the lifeblood of its economy, had been cut by more than half. The Iranian currency, the rial, was in free fall. Inflation was skyrocketing. The Iranian economy was, to put it bluntly, in crisis. And Iran blamed the West, particularly the United States and its allies in the region, for its suffering. Now, Saudi Arabia and Iran have been regional rivals for decades. They compete for influence in the Middle East. They support opposite sides in various conflicts. They represent different branches of Islam. Saudi Arabia is predominantly Sunni. Iran is predominantly Shia. The two nations are engaged in what political scientists call a Cold War for dominance in the region. But in 2012, tensions were particularly high for a specific reason: oil production. As Iranian oil exports were being strangled by sanctions, Saudi Arabia stepped up its production to fill the gap. This served two purposes for the Saudis. It helped stabilize global oil prices, keeping their Western allies happy, and it hurt Iran economically by preventing oil prices from spiking, which would have provided Iran with desperately needed revenue. From Iran's perspective, Saudi Arabia was actively cooperating with the U.S. to strangle the Iranian economy. And then there was Stuxnet. In 2010, the world learned about one of the most sophisticated cyber weapons ever created. Stuxnet was a computer worm specifically designed to sabotage Iran's nuclear enrichment facilities. It didn't just steal data or cause minor disruptions. It actually took control of industrial equipment, causing centrifuges to spin out of control and destroy themselves while reporting that everything was functioning normally. Stuxnet was eventually attributed to a joint U.S.-Israeli operation codenamed Olympic Games. It was cyber warfare in its purest form, one nation using digital weapons to physically destroy another nation's critical infrastructure. Iran was humiliated. Their most secretive, most heavily guarded nuclear facilities had been infiltrated and sabotaged, and they couldn't even really retaliate in conventional military terms without risking full-scale war. But cyber warfare? That was a different game. That was plausibly deniable. That was asymmetric. That was perfect for revenge. And so, according to most Western intelligence agencies and cybersecurity experts, Iran developed its own cyber warfare capabilities. They studied Stuxnet. They learned from it, and they began building their own digital weapons. Shamoon is widely believed to be one of those weapons. The timing made sense. August 2012, 2 years after Stuxnet, in the middle of crippling sanctions and economic warfare. The target made sense. Saudi Aramco, the oil giant of Iran's regional rival and U.S. ally. The damage made sense. If you can't physically bomb Saudi oil facilities, you hit them digitally. You disrupt their operations. You send a message, we can hurt you too. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. The evidence for Iranian involvement, while strong, is mostly circumstantial. Iran has never officially admitted to the attack. The cutting sword of justice cover story provided plausible deniability. And some aspects of the attack don't perfectly fit the pattern of Iranian cyber operations. Which raises a tantalizing question. What if there's more to this story than we know? Let me share something with you that most people don't know about the Shamoon attack. It wasn't just Saudi Aramco that was hit. On the exact same day, August 15, 2012, another major company in the Middle East suffered a nearly identical attack. RasGas, a Qatari natural gas company and one of the world's largest liquefied natural gas producers. Same malware, same MO, same type of devastation. This detail is crucial because it reveals something important about the attacker's strategy. They weren't just targeting Saudi Arabia. They were targeting the entire Gulf energy sector. Now, Qatar and Saudi Arabia have a complicated relationship. Sometimes allies, sometimes rivals, but both are major U.S. partners and both are key players in global energy markets. Hitting both simultaneously sends a specific message. We can reach anyone. Your defenses don't matter. Your wealth doesn't protect you. But it also complicates the attribution question. If this was purely about Saudi-Iranian rivalry, why hit Qatar? Some analysts believe this was about sending a message to all Gulf states that were cooperating with Western sanctions against Iran. Others think it was about demonstrating cyber capability, showing that the attackers could coordinate simultaneous strikes against multiple high-value targets. And then there's another wrinkle. The actual technical operation required inside knowledge. Think about it. To successfully infiltrate Saudi Aramco's network, establish persistence, map the infrastructure, and plant malware on tens of thousands of machines without being detected, that requires insider access or incredibly sophisticated phishing campaigns that compromise the right people. There's been speculation, never proven, that the attackers may have had help from insiders. Not necessarily employees actively working for Iran, but perhaps contractors, third-party vendors, or individuals who were socially engineered into providing access. This is where cyber attacks become as much about human psychology as technical skills. The best malware in the world is useless if you can't get it inside the target network. And the most secure network in the world is vulnerable if one person clicks the wrong email attachment or plugs in the wrong USB drive. One popular theory is that the attackers used spear phishing, highly targeted, personalized emails designed to trick specific individuals into opening malicious attachments or clicking malicious links. These weren't generic, "you've won the lottery" scams. These were sophisticated emails that referenced real projects, real colleagues, real business operations. They looked legitimate because they were crafted by people who had done their homework. Another theory involves compromised supply chains. Maybe a contractor's system was infected, and when that contractor connected to Aramco's network, the malware hitched a ride. Maybe software updates were poisoned. Maybe hardware was intercepted and modified before delivery. The truth is, we don't know for certain how Shamoon initially infiltrated Saudi Aramco. And that's terrifying, because if it happened once, it can happen again. And it did happen again. November 2016. For years after the original attack, Saudi Aramco employees started seeing familiar, nightmare-inducing images on their computer screens. Shamoon was back. This time, the attack was detected faster, and the damage was contained more effectively. Saudi Aramco had, understandably, invested heavily in cybersecurity after 2012. But the fact that the attackers came back, using an updated version of the same malware, sent shockwaves through the cybersecurity community. Shamoon 2.0, as it was called, had been refined. It used different image files for its wiper payload. This time, photos of Alan Kurdi, the Syrian refugee child whose body washed up on a Turkish beach, becoming one of the most iconic and heartbreaking images of the Syrian refugee crisis. The symbolism was, once again, political, deliberate, designed to send a message. And then, in 2017, Shamoon struck again. Shamoon 3.0 hit multiple organizations in Saudi Arabia, including Saudi Aramco, Samarek, another oil company, and various government agencies. Each iteration was slightly different, slightly improved, and adapted to evade the new security measures that had been put in place after previous attacks. This pattern, returning to the same targets with evolved versions of the same weapon, is characteristic of persistent threat actors. These aren't opportunistic hackers looking for quick scores. These are organized groups, likely state-sponsored, with long-term strategic objectives. And here's what really keeps cybersecurity professionals up at night. Shamoon is now in the wild. The code has been analyzed. Other actors have studied it. The techniques it pioneered, particularly its aggressive, fast-spreading wiping capabilities, have been adapted and incorporated into other malware strains. Shamoon didn't just hurt Saudi Aramco. It changed the game. It showed what was possible. It demonstrated that even the world's richest, most powerful companies could be brought to their knees by malware that cost, comparatively, almost nothing to develop. The economics of cyber warfare are terrifyingly asymmetric. Saudi Aramco likely spent hundreds of millions of dollars on cybersecurity. The Shamoon attack probably cost less than $1 million to plan and execute, and it caused $15 billion in damage. That's a return on investment that would make any military strategist envious. Let's zoom out for a moment and talk about what the Shamoon attacks mean for our world. First, critical infrastructure is vulnerable. Saudi Aramco isn't some small regional company with a weak IT department. This is one of the most valuable corporations on Earth, with massive resources and strong incentives to protect itself. If they can be hit this hard, who can't be? The answer is, nobody is safe. Power plants, water treatment facilities, hospitals, financial institutions, telecommunications networks. All of these systems are increasingly digital, increasingly networked, and increasingly vulnerable to the same types of attacks that devastated Saudi Aramco. In fact, we've seen this pattern repeat. The 2015 attack on Ukraine's power grid that left 230,000 people without electricity. The 2017 NotPetya attack caused over $10 billion in global damages. The 2021 Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack that disrupted fuel supplies across the U.S. East Coast. Each of these incidents shares DNA with Shamoon. Sophisticated malware, strategic targets, massive disruption. Second, attribution in cyberspace is incredibly difficult. Despite extensive investigation, we still can't say with absolute certainty who was behind Shamoon. Iran is the prime suspect, but there's no smoking gun, no definitive proof. And that ambiguity is a feature, not a bug, of cyber warfare. When one nation bombs another nation's infrastructure, there's no ambiguity. Bombs have signatures. Planes can be tracked. Responsibility is clear. But cyber attacks can be launched from anywhere, routed through multiple countries, disguised to look like the work of hacktivists or criminals. This creates a dangerous strategic environment where retaliation is difficult and deterrence is unclear. If you're not sure who hit you, how do you hit back? Third, the private sector is on the front lines of cyber warfare, whether they want to be or not. Saudi Aramco didn't ask to become a battleground in the Iranian-Saudi Cold War, but their strategic importance to the global economy and their ties to the Saudi government made them a target. The same is true for countless other companies. If you're a defense contractor, you're a target. If you're a major energy company, you're a target. If you're a pharmaceutical company working on sensitive research, you're a target. If you're a social media platform with billions of users, you're a target. The lines between corporate cybersecurity and national security are blurred to the point of meaninglessness. And fourth, recovery from a major cyber attack is incredibly expensive and time-consuming. Saudi Aramco had essentially unlimited resources, and it still took them weeks to restore basic operations and months to fully recover. Smaller organizations hit by similar attacks might never recover. Think about a regional hospital hit by ransomware, a small manufacturing company whose systems are wiped, a local government whose records are destroyed. These organizations don't have billions of dollars to spend on recovery. They can't buy 30,000 new computers on short notice. For them, a Shamoon-level attack would be existential. For those of you who are technically inclined, let's talk about what made Shamoon so effective from a purely technical standpoint, because understanding this helps us understand how to defend against similar attacks. Shamoon utilized a modular architecture. There wasn't just one big program doing everything. There were multiple components, each with a specific role. The dropper. This was the initial payload, likely delivered through phishing or by exploiting a vulnerability. Its job was simply to install the other components and establish persistence on the infected system. The wiper. This was the destructive module. It used the raw disk driver, a legitimate tool used for low-level disk access, to override hard drive sectors. By using a signed, legitimate driver, Shamoon could bypass many security controls that would have blocked unsigned or suspicious code. The wiper didn't just randomly overwrite data. It specifically targeted critical files and system directories to ensure maximum damage. It would overwrite the master boot record, making systems unbootable. It would corrupt the partition table, making data recovery virtually impossible. The spreader. This module was responsible for propagating Shamoon across the network. It used a combination of techniques: exploiting shared network drives, using harvested credentials to log into other systems, leveraging Windows administrative tools like PSExec, scanning for vulnerable systems on the local network. The reporter. This module communicated with command and control servers, sending back information about infected systems and receiving instructions. Interestingly, forensic analysis showed that the C2 infrastructure was relatively simple. Just a few servers, likely compromised machines in other countries used as proxies to hide the real origin of commands. What made Shamoon particularly dangerous was its speed and coordination. The malware was designed to spread quickly, establish itself on as many systems as possible, and then execute the wiping process simultaneously across all infected machines. This time bomb approach meant that by the time defenders realized what was happening, it was already too late. The malware also included anti-forensic techniques. It would try to wipe system logs, delete traces of its own execution, and generally make investigation and recovery more difficult. But here's what's really interesting from a technical perspective. Shamoon wasn't using any zero-day exploits. It wasn't leveraging unknown vulnerabilities. All the techniques it used were known. The raw disk driver was legitimate. The spreading mechanisms were standard. The coding wasn't particularly elegant. and yet it devastated one of the world's most well-defended companies. Why? Because Shamoon succeeded where it mattered most, in execution and impact. The attackers understood that you don't need the most sophisticated malware in the world if you can successfully deploy and coordinate a simpler but effective weapon against the right targets at the right time. It's the cyber equivalent of the old military adage: no plan survives first contact with the enemy, but a simple plan executed well beats a complex plan executed poorly. So what did the world learn from Shamoon? And more importantly, how can organizations protect themselves from similar attacks? Lesson 1. Defense in depth is not optional. Saudi Aramco had security measures in place. They just weren't enough. The key lesson here is that modern cybersecurity requires multiple layers of defense. Network segmentation to limit the spread of malware. Application whitelisting to prevent unauthorized software execution. Endpoint detection and response systems that can identify abnormal behavior. Regular security audits and penetration testing. Incident response plans that are actually practiced and updated. No single defense will stop a determined, sophisticated attacker. You need multiple overlapping layers so that if one fails, others can catch the threat. Lesson 2. Backups are your last line of defense. One of the reasons Shamoon was so devastating was that it destroyed data on active systems. But organizations that had robust, offline backup systems were able to recover much more quickly. The key word there is offline. If your backups are connected to your network, they can be wiped too. Modern backup strategies require regular, automated backups, multiple backup copies in different locations, offline or air-gapped backups that can't be accessed from the network, regular testing of backup restoration procedures. You don't want to discover that your backup system doesn't work when you're in the middle of a crisis. Lesson 3. Threat intelligence matters. One of the most valuable things that came out of the Shamoon investigation was the detailed technical analysis shared by cybersecurity firms. When researchers from Symantec, Kaspersky, and others published their findings, they gave the entire security community the information needed to detect and defend against Shamoon. Organizations need to participate in threat intelligence sharing, both consuming threat intelligence from others and contributing their own findings when appropriate. The cybersecurity community is strongest when it works together. Lesson 4. Insider threats and supply chain security are critical. The likely initial infection vector for Shamoon involved either compromised credentials or social engineering. This means organizations need to implement strong authentication, multi-factor authentication everywhere possible. Educate employees about phishing and social engineering. Monitor for suspicious insider activity. Vet third-party vendors and contractors. Implement the principle of least privilege. People should only have access to what they absolutely need. Lesson 5. Recovery plans must be more than documents. After Shamoon, many organizations created or updated their disaster recovery plans. But a plan that sits in a binder on a shelf is worthless. Recovery plans need to be regularly tested through tabletop exercises and simulations, updated to reflect current threats and technologies, known and understood by key personnel, supported by prepositioned resources like backup hardware contracts. Saudi Aramco's ability to recover as quickly as they did, despite the massive scale of the damage, came down to their capacity to mobilize resources and make rapid decisions. That kind of crisis management doesn't happen by accident. It requires preparation. But you know what's fascinating about the entire Shamoon story? For all the technical details, for all the sophisticated malware and geopolitical intrigue, the most important factor in both the attack and the response was human. Humans made decisions that left Saudi Aramco vulnerable. Maybe someone clicked on a phishing email. Maybe someone used a weak password. Maybe someone didn't properly configure a security setting. We don't know the exact vector, but we know that somewhere in the chain, human action or inaction created the vulnerability that Shamoon exploited. And humans made the decisions that saved Saudi Aramco. IT teams are working around the clock to contain the damage. Executives are making rapid decisions about resource allocation. Employees are adapting to working without computers. Procurement teams are securing emergency hardware supplies. The entire incident is a reminder that cybersecurity is ultimately not about technology. It's about people. The best firewall in the world doesn't matter if someone writes their password on a sticky note attached to their monitor. The most sophisticated threat detection system is useless if analysts ignore its alerts or don't know how to interpret them. This is why security awareness training is so critical. Every employee is a potential vulnerability or a potential line of defense. When people understand the threats, when they know what to look for, when they care about security, organizations become dramatically more resilient. But training isn't enough. Security has to be built into the culture. It can't be the IT department's problem. It has to be everyone's responsibility. From the CEO to the newest intern, everyone has to understand that security matters and that their actions have consequences. Saudi Aramco learned this the hard way. But they did learn. After 2012, the company completely transformed its approach to cybersecurity. They invested billions, yes, billions with a B, in security infrastructure, personnel, and training. They created a dedicated cybersecurity center. They hired some of the best security experts in the world. They implemented security measures that many experts now point to as best practices. And when Shamoon returned in 2016 and 2017, those investments paid off. The damage was dramatically less. The response was faster. The recovery was quicker. Pain is an excellent teacher. The question is, do we have to experience the pain ourselves, or can we learn from others' experiences? Here's something you need to understand. Shamoon wasn't the end of this type of attack. It was the beginning. Since 2012, we've seen an explosion in destructive cyber attacks. The tactics pioneered by Shamoon have been refined, adapted, and deployed by multiple threat actors around the world. In 2014, North Korea allegedly launched a devastating attack against Sony Pictures, wiping data and leaking confidential information in retaliation for a satirical movie about Kim Jong-un. In 2017, NotPetya, initially disguised as ransomware, but actually a wiper similar to Shamoon, tore through global networks, causing over $10 billion in damages. Companies like Maersk, Merck, and FedEx were hit hard. Maersk's chairman later called it the worst thing to happen to us in our 113-year history. In 2018, attackers targeted the Olympic destroyer malware at the Winter Olympics in South Korea, disrupting operations and services during the opening ceremony. In 2019, Iranian hackers allegedly deployed wiper malware against targets in the Middle East as tensions with the U.S. escalated. In 2020, during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, hospitals and healthcare facilities faced an onslaught of ransomware attacks, some of which included wiper components. The pattern is clear. Destructive cyber attacks are becoming more common, more sophisticated, and more dangerous. And the targets are expanding. It's not just oil companies anymore. It's everyone. Ransomware has become a billion-dollar criminal industry. Nation-states are building offensive cyber capabilities at an unprecedented rate. The barrier to entry for cyber attacks is lower than ever. You can literally rent ransomware as a service on dark web forums. And here's the really scary part. Critical infrastructure is more vulnerable now than it was in 2012. Why? Because of increasing connectivity. The Internet of Things means that everything from industrial control systems to medical devices to cars is connected to the Internet. Each connection is a potential vulnerability. Each network device is a potential entry point for attackers. Smart cities, smart grids, smart factories, they're all incredibly efficient and incredibly vulnerable. We're building a world where a cyber attack could potentially shut down power to an entire region, disrupt water treatment systems, manipulate medical devices, cause industrial accidents, crash financial markets, disable transportation systems. This isn't science fiction. These capabilities exist today, and the number of actors, both state and criminal, who possess these capabilities is growing. The next Shamoon could hit a power grid instead of an oil company. It could target hospitals instead of corporations. It could affect millions of people instead of thousands of employees. Are we ready for that? Honestly, probably not. Let's talk about who's actually out there in cyberspace, plotting attacks, developing malware, targeting critical infrastructure. Nation-state actors, these are the heavy hitters. Groups like Russia's APT-28 and APT-29, China's APT-1 and APT-10, North Korea's Lazarus Group, and Iran's APT-33 and APT-34. These groups are often directly affiliated with military or intelligence services. They have significant resources, sophisticated capabilities, and strategic objectives that go beyond financial gain. Nation-state actors are playing the long game. They're not just looking for quick hits. They're establishing persistent access to networks, mapping critical infrastructure, pre-positioning malware for potential future conflicts. It's the digital equivalent of military reconnaissance and preparation. Cybercriminal organizations. These are profit-motivated groups that treat hacking as a business. They're responsible for most ransomware attacks, business email compromise schemes, and financial fraud. While they're generally less sophisticated than nation-state actors, they're more aggressive and more opportunistic. Some cybercriminal groups operate at scales that rival legitimate businesses. They have HR departments, customer service teams, R&D divisions, and profit-sharing arrangements. They're running professional operations that happen to be illegal. Hacktivists. These are ideologically motivated actors who use cyber attacks to make political statements or advance social causes. The cutting sword of justice persona used in the Shamoon attack was claiming to be a hacktivist, though most experts believe it was actually a state-sponsored group using hacktivist cover. True hacktivist groups are generally less sophisticated than nation-state or criminal actors, but they can still cause significant disruption, especially when they target websites, leak data, or conduct denial-of-service attacks. Insider threats. Sometimes the threat comes from within. Disgruntled employees, careless contractors, or individuals who've been bribed or coerced into providing access. Insider threats are particularly dangerous because they often have legitimate access to systems and know how to avoid security controls. And here's what makes the threat landscape particularly complex. These categories overlap and interact. Criminal groups sometimes work as contractors for nation-states. Nation-state actors sometimes masquerade as criminals or hacktivists. Insiders might be working with external actors. The days of clear, identifiable enemies are over. In cyberspace, you're facing a constantly shifting array of threats, and you often won't know who hit you until long after the attack is over, if ever. So where does this all lead? What does the future of cyber warfare look like? Here are some trends that keep cybersecurity experts awake at night. AI-powered attacks. Artificial intelligence is a double-edged sword in cybersecurity. While AI can help defenders detect threats and respond to attacks, it can also be weaponized by attackers. Imagine malware that uses machine learning to adapt its behavior based on the defenses it encounters. Imagine phishing campaigns that are generated by AI and perfectly tailored to each target. Imagine autonomous malware that can make decisions without human intervention. This isn't theoretical. These capabilities are being developed right now. Supply chain compromises. The SolarWinds attack of 2020 showed how devastating supply chain compromises can be. By inserting malware into a widely used software update, attackers gained access to thousands of organizations, including multiple U.S. government agencies. This type of attack, compromising a trusted vendor to reach multiple downstream targets, is incredibly efficient and incredibly difficult to defend against. Expect to see more supply chain attacks in the future, targeting software vendors, hardware manufacturers, cloud service providers, and other critical links in the technology supply chain. Quantum computing. When practical quantum computers become available, and most experts think this will happen within the next 10 to 20 years, they will break most current encryption systems. All the data being intercepted and stored by intelligence agencies today could potentially be decrypted in the future. Organizations need to start planning for post-quantum cryptography now. Critical infrastructure targeting. As our infrastructure becomes more connected and more dependent on digital systems, it becomes a more attractive target. The potential for catastrophic damage from cyber attacks on power grids, water systems, transportation networks, and healthcare facilities is enormous. We've already seen test cases, attacks on Ukraine's power grid, on Saudi Arabia's oil facilities, on water treatment plants in the United States. These are proof-of-concept demonstrations. The real question is, when will we see a truly catastrophic attack? And will we be ready for it? Blurred lines of warfare. Cyber operations exist in a gray zone between peace and war. When does a cyber attack become an act of war? When is military retaliation justified? International law and norms haven't caught up with the technology. This ambiguity is dangerous because it creates the potential for miscalculation and escalation. A cyber attack meant to send a message could be interpreted as an act of war. A defensive cyber operation could be mistaken for an offensive one. In a crisis, when decisions need to be made quickly, this ambiguity could lead to disastrous consequences. The democratization of cyber weapons. As tools become more available and knowledge becomes more widespread, the number of actors capable of conducting sophisticated cyber attacks continues to grow. What once required a nation-state might soon be achievable by a criminal group, a terrorist organization, or even a sufficiently motivated individual. This is perhaps the most unsettling trend. The barriers to cyber warfare are collapsing. The same technology that connects us and empowers us also makes us vulnerable in ways we're only beginning to understand. Let me bring this back to where we started. A Wednesday morning in August 2012, when 30,000 computers at Saudi Aramco suddenly displayed burning American flags and then died. That event, as devastating as it was for Saudi Aramco, was a warning shot. It was a demonstration of capability. It was a message that said, the digital world you've built is fragile. The systems you depend on are vulnerable. We can reach you. And that message should terrify us, because the implications extend far beyond one oil company, far beyond Saudi Arabia, far beyond the Middle East. We live in a world that is utterly dependent on digital systems. Our electrical grids, our water treatment plants, our hospitals, our financial systems, our transportation networks, our communications infrastructure, all of it runs on computers. All of it is networked. All of it is potentially vulnerable. The COVID-19 pandemic showed us what happens when a biological threat disrupts our global systems. Imagine what would happen if a cyber attack took down critical infrastructure in multiple countries simultaneously. Imagine if power grids failed, if financial systems crashed, if communications networks went dark. This isn't alarmism. This is the reality that cybersecurity professionals and national security experts are preparing for. But here's the thing, we're not powerless. We can build more resilient systems. We can implement better security practices. We can develop stronger defenses. We can create deterrence. We can establish international norms and agreements. The Shamoon attack taught us valuable lessons. Saudi Aramco was unprepared in 2012, but they learned. They invested. They improved. And when the attacks came again, they were ready. That's the path forward for all of us, individually, organizationally, nationally, globally. We need to take cybersecurity seriously, not as an IT issue, but as an existential issue. For individuals, practice good security hygiene. Use strong, unique passwords. Enable two-factor authentication. Be skeptical of suspicious emails. Keep your software updated. Back up your important data. For organizations, invest in security infrastructure and personnel. Implement defense in-depth strategies. Conduct regular security audits. Train your employees. Have incident response plans and actually practice them. For governments, develop clear policies and capabilities for cyber defense. Establish international norms for cyber warfare. Share threat intelligence. Support critical infrastructure protection. Hold attackers accountable. The attackers who deployed Shamoon demonstrated something important. In cyberspace, a relatively small investment can yield enormous destructive power. Asymmetric warfare has always existed, but cyber warfare takes it to a new level. But here's what they also demonstrated, perhaps inadvertently. Resilience is possible. Recovery is possible. Saudi Aramco survived. They rebuilt. They became stronger. And that's ultimately the message I want to leave you with. Yes, the threats are real. Yes, the stakes are high. Yes, the challenges are enormous. But we are not helpless victims. We have agency. We have the capability. We have the ability to prepare, to defend, to respond, and to recover. The story of Shamoon is a warning, but it's also a call to action. It's a reminder that the digital world we've built is powerful and wonderful and enabling, but also fragile and vulnerable and in need of protection. Every one of us has a role to play in that protection. Every click, every password, every security decision matters. Because the next Shamoon isn't a matter of if, it's a matter of when. The question is, will we be ready? If this story opened your eyes to the reality of cyber warfare and made you think differently about digital security, do me a favor, share this video. The more people who understand these threats, the more resilient we all become. Drop a comment below. What surprised you most about the Shamoon attack? Are you worried about cyber attacks on critical infrastructure? What do you think should be done to protect against these threats? And if you want to dive deeper into cybersecurity topics, into the hidden world of cyber warfare, into the stories that shape our digital reality, hit that subscribe button. We're exploring the intersection of technology, security, and geopolitics, the stories that don't make headlines but change the world. The digital battlefield is real. The stakes couldn't be higher. And the war for our connected future is being fought right now, in ways most people never see. Stay curious. Stay informed. Stay secure. Until next time.